Well, hello and welcome back for episode 2 of season 2 of the Path Podcast. We are so glad that you're here. I am Jason.
I'm Derek. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and today we have a really special treat. We are joined by a special guest, Miss Judy Holly, and Derek is going to kind of introduce us to her, and then we're going to talk with her over the next few minutes. So take it away.
So Judy is joining us today, and she and I met. Judy, can you believe it was 11 years ago now in September?
No.
Yeah, and so I became the children's pastor at Lost Mountain Baptist Church. Judy and her husband Tim were the 3-year-old Sunday school teachers, but also kind of taught, helped kind of structure our worship time for preschoolers. So we got to know each other pretty well. She was serving in the ministry as I was the children's director there, and so we got to know each other pretty well. Judy is, you're a licensed professional counselor, right?
Right.
And so she also does quite a bit of marriage counseling with that, other types as well, but a lot with marriage counseling. So we would often, we would do several events. We probably did six or more?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. A couple of a retreat or two. We did a church event, and then we did some snippet Sunday night event.
Yeah, and we called them date nights and those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so Judy was integral in helping us reach out to married folks in our church and in our community. And so I thought it'd be really cool, since we just talked about the imperfect marriage, or the imperfect spouse. It'd be cool to ask some questions from someone who's kind of been able to work with many couples and help them kind of work through some of their imperfections. So thank you so much for joining us today, Judy. Start off by telling us a little bit about you, your just your life, and particularly how you got into marriage counseling.
My husband and I, Tim, we've been married for 34 years. He was a pilot in the Navy, so we moved around a lot. And at that time, being military, you move around a lot. It's hard to get full-time positions. So I just worked a lot of administrative positions, whatever. But in 1991, God really called us into adoption. And we started working with an adoption agency in 91 while we were living up in Washington State. It was a Christian agency, and they required us to do marriage counseling prior to adoption. It was part of the process. Tim and I met when we were 16. We knew each other for 6 years. Then we'd been married for about 6 years. So at that time, we thought we had it all together. We thought we knew everything there was about being married. Thought I had a great, perfect marriage. Well, it was just amazing through those sessions of just what we learned that we didn't know, and what we really weren't doing well. And also the potentials of some pitfalls that were coming our way pretty quickly if we didn't change how we did some things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when God really planted the seed in the beginning with me on becoming a counselor, because God just really planted that seed in me of going into counseling, of helping people. I've always had a heart for missions and people, but that's when really God planted that seed. Let's fast forward. We moved again, military, ended up in the Atlanta area. By this time, we have 2 small children, and God really started stirring my heart again, but gave me a patience to wait. And so I call this my second life. Once my boys got old enough, Tyler and Matt got old enough to, I felt, they were in school and they didn't need me quite as much. I went back to school, and I went to, at that time it was called PSI. Now it's Ridgemont Graduate University in Atlanta. Did my master's in Christian counseling, and still set for state boards, but they integrate theology with psychology. It was just really important to me to do that, because everything I do is through my Christian lens, through how I view my life through my relationship with Christ. So it was an amazing program. So I graduated there in 2008. Of course, you do a couple years of internship before that. So But full time, after school, I started in 2008, and I just found a niche too, working in church, and with preschoolers, and seeing families that if they don't start off on the right foot, and sometimes that's the first time they come to counseling, is all of a sudden they've got two different lifestyles, and they come together. So I've kind of, that's where marriage counseling really, my heart kind of went into marriage counseling. So is to see that when you have couples, if you can get off on the right foot, it makes all the difference in the world. Yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Judy. I want to, we have a couple of questions we want to ask you. And so the first one is, and I know this is kind of a tough question, but if there was one thing that you could tell a couple who is struggling in their marriage, like say you're riding an elevator with a couple and they know that you're a marriage counselor, and so they ask you, hey, what can we do to get us pointed in the right direction? What's one thing that you would suggest there?
No, that's a loaded question, but this is not a shameless plug, I promise you, but my advice was get to a marriage counselor, a Christian marriage counselor. When I say Christian, because of the Christian principles that go into marriage. And the reason why I say that is because if you don't have the tools, you can't do it on your own, and you don't know the tools. And that's usually what happens, is helping somebody with the right tools to be able then to work on their marriage. Like I said, Tim and I thought we had it all together, but we had nowhere near had the tools that we needed. Kind of one of my favorite quotes is from Maya Angelou, and she says, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's marriage. And, it's like Tim can send me to Home Depot to pick up something for him, but if I don't know what the tool is, what it is that he's wanting, and what is he even using it for, I'm not going to bring home the right tool. If he tells me, gives me a picture of it, tells me, now you can look on your phone, tell what aisle it's on. I can go and I can bring it back because he's given me all the information that I need to help him. And if you're doing that in marriage, and going to a counselor to help you with your marriage tool belt, and you become intentional in using those tools, that's how you're going to equip your marriage. That's how you're going to keep the enemy from entering into your marriage. So I know that's not maybe the answer you're looking for, but it's really, that is the answer. You have to have the tools or you're not ever going to do better, because you're going to keep going in circles.
Yeah. So Judy, I work with a lot of couples on the front end, right? Pre-marriage counseling. And so one of the tools I try to give them outright, and one of the things it seems so simple, but it always is so profound. You can see it in their eyes, like, oh my goodness. It's just like, hey, if we can talk about these things, if I can get you talking about these things, you're going to have better success. If you'll communicate early on, what would you say, what part does communication play in, being one of those tools in the tool belt?
It's the number one thing, but it's also communicating properly.
Right.
You're doing it in a loving way. You're doing it not to get your side won.
Right.
You're doing it as what am I called to do as the wife? What am I called? God's calling me to do, and showing my husband his love through me. And so, communication, but it's about not attacking, not accusing, being loving about it. You can still get your point across. The other part of communication is listening.
Right.
To really listen. That's one of the biggest issues I have couples say is they never listen to me. I don't ever feel heard. They only want to get their point across. So it is about communication is absolutely 100%.
Yeah, I find that the same thing, I'll say communication is a two-way street, right? I mean, you can talk, but that's not communicating. Someone has to receive it on the other end. And so you have this back and forth, and it has to be out of mutual respect, which is a term I learned from you. in some of those date nights that we talked about, that mutual respect, and mutual submission even is the term I learned from you.
Absolutely.
And so, one of the things I find is that these couples, they don't mean to not listen to one another. They don't mean to not care. They don't realize it comes across that way. And so that's one of the things I work with on the front end, which is much easier because I've worked on the other end too. And it's much easier to work on the front end. But it's like, you've got to realize that your relationship is, you didn't intend to start it like being mad at each other and like getting at one another. That's just kind of what's happened as the balls roll downhill. Can you speak to that at all?
Absolutely, because that's the problem is a lot of times let me back up. Absolutely, really good premarital is beginning of that foundation. That is like setting the concrete for the foundation of the marriage. And a lot of people do not have that. So that is huge. I love the fact how much you do premarital. Then the next part of that is if that's not in place and other things are happening, hurt comes in. And when you've been hurt, you can't hear. Because your hurt is so intense. You can't listen, you can't hear, you can't respond appropriately. So the longer you go, there's more of that builds up between the two of you. And I call it like, putting a brick wall between you. Every time that happens, you're putting another brick, put a little mortar, put a brick, and pretty soon you can't see over the wall. And that emotional wall kind of goes with what I listened to your sermon about, the intimacy. It's not a physical thing. Intimacy is an emotional thing.
Right.
And if you are not emotionally connected to your spouse and feel that vulnerability between the two of you, it's that's the biggest hindrance right there, is because you don't feel safe. You don't feel emotionally safe with your spouse because of hurt.
Yeah. That's a perfect lead in to our next question, is that, a lot of times when people are struggling with their marriages, one of the symptoms of that comes to the forefront very quickly is intimacy, or the lack thereof. And so how would you help lead a couple through struggling with marital intimacy? Where do you start to even try to repair that?
You go back to that emotional connection. Because that's what breaks down first, is your emotional connection with each other. One of I think it's Kevin Lehman uses the phrase that women get connection outside the bedroom, men get connection through the bedroom. And what he's saying is that women need that one-on-one emotional connection with their husband, that listening, like Derek, you were talking about, not just hearing, but listening and responding to let their spouse know they've been heard. So she feels emotionally connected to her husband. She's going to be more receptive physically. Okay. Men actually get their connection through that physical connection, but that's where you get in that vicious cycle of, if she's not feeling emotionally connected to him, he's frustrated. He's not going to then emotionally connect with her. So then she's not emotionally connecting with him, and you see where it goes. It kind of goes down that rabbit hole. So it is absolutely, if you do not have that emotional, psychological, spiritual connection, the physical will not be there, because it will then just be an act. But when you have all those pieces with the physical connection, then that is when it's on a whole different level. That's when you have a connection that is just amazing. That emotional, spiritual connection.
Yeah, I think it's Kevin Lehman who also says that sex begins in the kitchen.
Yes.
And and so I'll tell couples that, in pre-marriage counseling too, is like, look, and I'll use the old adage, men are like microwaves, women are like crock pots, right? And it's funny with newlyweds, they don't know that, so their eyes get real big, like, oh, okay. But it's just that idea is that you've got to build that emotional connection if you want the physical, and it's that emotional intimacy begins way before true physical intimacy. An act may take place, but intimacy did not occur.
It is right there. And then when that intimacy is not there, the emotional intimacy is not there, then it's like an empty feeling. So why do you want to go and have that empty feeling again? You're going to avoid it. You're going to avoid it again. So that is that part that we have to really work on, is just having that emotional connection. I always ask couples too when they come in. That's one of the questions I'll ask. How often are you physically intimate? That tells a lot. Unless there's a medical issue, there's other issues that's causing that connection not being there. But that already tells me a lot of where they are in their marriage with that, because it's one of those things that God has given just that couple, and it is such a special thing for that couple. But if all those other markers are not being hit, that is the first thing that you will notice.
Yeah, it really gives meat to that idea of unity. One flesh is how the Bible describes it. Yeah. But it's more than just that physical one flesh. It's much more of a, like, you are intimate, together, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, So
right,
yeah.
Right. I even liken it to, how are we growing as Christians? We are not in that deep relationship with Christ if we are not studying the Word. If we are not even meeting with in the church body and listening to ministers preach, or in a Bible study, or in prayer. If we aren't doing all those components, we're not going to have that relationship with Him. It's that way with a spouse. If you're not doing all the things that you need to do, and being, the biggest word, and couples get sick of hearing this word, and that's intentional. If you're not constantly intentional about your marriage, getting up every single day, and I truly believe this, if you get up every single day and say, what can I do for my husband today that shows him I love him? And we're not talking a big, huge deal. I'm just talking an extra long hug, or an eye-to-eye contact. Thank you so much for what you do for me. Or emptying the dishwasher in the kitchen.
That would work in my household, yeah.
I love it. Yeah, wives love that stuff, let me tell you. So yeah, it's about being intentional. Every day being intentional.
That's great. That's really good. So just to kind of switch gears for just a moment for the rest of our time here, we don't want to make the assumption that every marriage in our church is falling apart, because they're not. And we also don't want to make the assumption that anybody has it all figured out. So what I want to ask you is, what are some best practices to safeguard a marriage relationship? Say that things are okay. They're not. There's never a situation where there's no room for improvement. But say things are okay. What are some best practices to safeguard that, to keep things okay in a marriage?
Okay. I always tell people, nobody wakes up one morning, stretches, goes out and has an affair just because on a whim. It's slow. That is the way the enemy works. That's the way Satan works. It's slow. So if you are not, again, intentional every day about putting your marriage first, have it at the forefront of your mind. Physically, there's some ways to do that. I really encourage all couples to know each other's passwords on everything. Phones, on anything that they have passwords to. Having a connection time, whether it's first thing in the morning, late in the afternoon. Maybe it can only happen once a week if somebody travels a lot, but that's literally that alone time, just the two of you, not just superficial talking or talking at each other about schedules, kids, whatever. Really having conversations of, how was your week? What can I do for you this week? Where did I miss the mark this week with you? Having those conversations, and always, letting your thinking, would I be doing this if my spouse was here with me? Because if you can say that, whether it looks something very innocent, but what would it be like if my spouse was here? Would I be doing this? Those are all ways to safeguard your marriage.
Right.
And I always say, again, passwords, I always say, best friend should not be a male.
Mhm.
Male's best friend should not be a female. There's nothing wrong with having conversations. And, Derek and I have had texts back and forth, but Derek and I have had a long-standing friendship. We worked together in ministry. He's worked with my husband. I've worked with Allison. That I'm not saying absolute 100% not having contact with the opposite sex. I'm saying when things start going in a different direction in your mind and your thoughts about another person other than your spouse, then you need to really look at those red flags. Always kind of be self-aware.
Right. Yeah, that's helpful. I think what we wanted to do is like take this idea of we are imperfect. We the kind of route we took was that we need Jesus. That's really what it comes down to in our marriages. But I love that we kind of boiled it down to these intentional things that we hopefully I think will be really helpful. I have some things just for my own self. I'm thinking, that would be good. Just the intentionality piece. I think that's huge. Yeah, so thank you so much. This was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. Are there any final thoughts, any pearls of wisdom that you'd leave with us before we say goodbye?
The only thing I would say is, to me, because this has resonated with me so much over the years, because when I first heard this was years after we were married, because when you go to and of course being just at a wedding recently that Derek did, that he performed, we always see the wedding vows as to each other. And what is profound for me is it's really not a covenant that you're making to each other. It's you are making a covenant with God about your spouse.
Yeah.
And that is what, if you will view your marriage through, it's not about my spouse. It is about my relationship with Christ and how I fulfill that covenant I made with Christ about my spouse. And if you view your marriage through that covenant is with God about your spouse, I think you look at it a little differently, because it's not between two humans. It's between you and your Lord about the person that he's joined you with.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, I think that is also another way to really bring it back home of applying that to the spiritual part of what marriage looks like.
Yeah. Very cool.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Judy, for your time.
Sure.
We appreciate it. And this is where we turn it over to you. We'd love to know your thoughts. Is there anything that Judy has said today that maybe stirred up some ideas for you, or some thoughts or some questions you might have? We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at thepath@lafayettefirst.life, or you can comment on this podcast or on the YouTube video. But we'd love to hear from you. So until next time, I am Jason.
I'm Derek.
And we look forward to seeing you next time.